Hey everybody, what's up? It is iWushok with another video. This one's actually from a request that I've gotten from a few people, and it's not only just like kind of what sets are there, what modifiers are there, but how do you use them? So I'm gonna first start off with building a DPS build. I've always been DPS. I'll sometimes have a secondary bait set, but I always go hard into DPS. So I'm gonna go over what you're gonna want to look for, what you're gonna want to avoid, and how you're gonna want to min-max things. Then after that, I'm going to go over my build and why I have what I have, and then we'll be done. But before you watch this, make sure you check out my DPS modifier video. It's going to go over a lot of terms that if you don't know what they are, this video is not going to make a whole lot of sense. So you'll want to just get an idea of what I'm talking about when I say things like empower or dual strike. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. For DPS, what you're going to want to do is generally have your modifiers balanced. That's things like your empower, redirect, and critical hit chance. Mine aren't super balanced, but I did that for a reason that I'll go over in a little bit. I have 36% critical chance, 13% empower chance, and 44% dual strike. If I wanted to fully min-max my damage output, I would probably want to lower my dual strike just a little bit to go into empower, but I do have mine set here purposefully because I'm a multi-hit DPS. The reason that you want to balance your stats as opposed to a tank that wants to go all in on one is yours can proc with each other. It is definitely possible for you to hit a critical strike that is also empowered and also is dual strike, whereas a tank can't deflect and absorb the same hits. So if you just proc dual strike and empower, you've actually got 4 times the damage because you're going to hit twice for twice as much. And so you want to increase the chance of proccing all of them at the same time. Because my build is centered around applying shock to enemies though, I do want to hit as many times as I can so I can apply that shock as much as possible. So that's one of the big things that you want to look for with DPS that a lot of people don't think about when they're building their actual set. Now there's 2 types of DPS builds, unless you want to go into like the major ultra mega whale ones, but they're going to be multi-hit and nuke. A multi-hit DPS relies mostly on proccing its pet and proccing modifiers and amplifiers. The whole point of them is to hit multiple times back to back and just keep hitting. That's going to be a more powerful DPS than your nuke DPS, but it comes with the problem of barrier will stop it. And if you go against an enemy that has an augment that says attack team whenever you get hit, that's going to make your day really, really bad. The other option is a nuke DPS, and it lets you get past barrier and those augments, but it does have lower overall output because you're not proccing your pet nearly as much. It does, kind of a side note, make your runs go faster because you have less turns and less things to calculate, but you're going to do less damage. A multi-hit may only hit for 1,000 damage, but they hit 10 times, whereas a nuke only hits once, but they hit for 8,000 damage. So overall, the nuke is hitting for less than the multi-hit, but if multi-hit runs into barrier, they'll only hit for 1,000 instead of 8,000 or 10,000. Stats between them shift a little bit. Early game as a DPS, you're going to go 2-1-2, which means 2 into strength, 1 into stamina, 2 into speed, but later on it'll shift depending on whether you want to be multi-hit or nuke. I'm currently at around 3-2-6, so for every 9 stat points, I'll put 3 into strength, 1 into stamina, and 6 into speed. For strength, whenever you're building something, you're either going to want it to be lower, like mine, like around 20% of your stats, or higher, like 60% of your stats, where you're getting closer to like the tank levels, but you're going to have low speed if you do that, and that's where your nuke comes in. Stamina needs to be higher than your bait. Generally, you want to look at around 100 to 300 stats higher. This is something that you want to look at your friends list for and not your bait familiars. I use Thunmoth, which means that I could have as low as 11,200 strength or stamina and be just fine. However, most of my baits on my friends list, which would be in my raids, are going to have around 12,000 to 13,000 stamina. So I need to be higher than them just in case. You want to be able to take like maybe a full hit before you get underneath them, but you don't want to be taking all of the attack weakest because you don't have anything defensive on you except if you have an ancient, you get a little bit of damage reduction. But that's really all you want for your stamina. For speed, anything you have left. You may have less than your strength, you may have more than your strength, and that depends entirely on whether you're going to be a nuke or a multi-hit DPS. If you have high speed, you're going to want to be hitting more, being multi-hit will be there, and if you have lower, you're going to be nuke. For your stats though, like when you decide what you're going to do, it directly depends on your set. You might have a set like camo that is going to hit really hard every time it hits, but it's not going to provide a lot of multi-hits, or you may end up with a set that does a lot of multi-hits but doesn't hit super hard, and that's where you're going to decide where you're at. There's also a lot of ancients that you might look at if you want to do stretch goals, if you actually pay to win, or if you're free to play and just have stretch goals there. The first one and the only one that I actually have equipped is Star Weave, and it just reduces the amount of sets required. So that lets you weave 2 sets to have both the 4/4 and a 3/4 of what you need. It's useful for everyone. The next one is going to be Clover. To me personally, it's more useful on tanks, but it is really important for DPS as well if you decide to go that route. It lets you reroll all of your modifiers more than once if you fail the first time. So if you've got 75% dual strike and then you happen to roll the 25% failure, it'll just roll it again. You're going to bump up your numbers a lot there. It just doesn't fit into my build and I haven't run for it yet, so I don't have it. The other option is Elementarium, and that'll take all of your major runes and double them. If you don't have Weave, it's really cool to use, but I think it gets outclassed by a whole lot. Another option that's really great as a DPS, and I consider this a super stretch, is using Shield of Iscarium and Body of Iscarium. Chuck actually has this equipped right now. Shield of Iscarium has one attack where you'll hit yourself like 8 times, and then your Body of Iscarium has a 15% chance to combust when your team gets hit, and you're hitting yourself a whole bunch of times. So when you combine that with Clover, you're combusting the enemy a lot without ever touching them. You're not going to proc barrier, you're not going to proc their brains. It's a very, very strong build. It's nearly impossible to counter as a tank. However, it is a very, very expensive build to have right now. So let's go over my build really quickly. I don't have anything too crazy here. I do have Star Weave so that I can weave in 2 different sets. I use the 4/4 of Aeneas, which gives me damage and rage for each SP I spend, speed, and then I get 15% team enrage and increasing my enrage storage from 10% to 40%. And at the beginning of my turn, it will always shock the furthest enemy for however much enrage I happen to have. So I'm going to get some every time my team gets hit, I'm going to get some every time I get hit, so I get to shock them at the beginning of my turn. I also use the 3/4 from Thundercracker. It gives me accuracy for every SP my skills cost, which is nice to have, and gain half of an SP whenever I trigger an EMP, which is applying 3 shock procs to an enemy. I purposefully have the Thundercracker main hand for its skill set. The 0 SP will shock the furthest enemy. Now, if you remember right, my Aeneas also shocks the furthest enemy. So if I proc dual strike on my first hit, I can also proc a shock and proc EMP on my first turn. That's wildly powerful. Depending on the size of the team, you can end up having a chance to proc your pet like 5 or 6 times on your very first turn. It's extremely powerful. I also use Monarch's Command as my accessory because 26% to dual strike, but also 26% to crit chance. There are very few places you can get critical chance at all, accessories being really the only one, and Monarch having the highest chance there. Because that's the only place you can get it, it is very valuable to have. I also use Kolk, which will attack my closest enemy for a pretty high amount. When I hit the enemy, 35% chance, just it does a lot of damage. While I'm dealing a lot of damage to the back line, it's dealing a lot of damage to the front line. If I ever feel the need for being a support, I can switch over to a defensive pet, but I'm at a point now where I don't really need that defensive pet. Early in the game, even as an offensive player, you want that defensive pet. My mount is Freegal, 5% dual strike. The reason I use him is because I don't have Dracus. Dracus is just a better mount, but Freegal does work very well. For runes, I have it split between dual strike and empower. I have 30% chance when I get hit to increase my SP by 1, and 5% chance to ignore an enemy's bonuses. That one's a really cool one for taking out baits that are stacked on evade. The bane of my existence. I also have, while at full health, SP regeneration is increased by 25% because I will likely be at full health for the majority of the fight. For enchants, I have 3 dual strike ones and 3 empower ones. I don't have them split specifically with each other. I see a lot of people that'll be split dual strike and power on each enchant, but this lets me make it so if I need to add more empower, I can just pull a full dual strike away and I don't have to try and move things around more. The stats on them aren't the greatest because I haven't re-rolled a ton of them. That one's a really good one. But they all work well enough, and enchants are really good to go after because they up tier with you when you go to a new tier. So that's my build. It's not phenomenal, but it gets the job done, and I can solo some world bosses as a DPS, just a tier or 2 behind. And when I go into world boss, I'm never kicked. My build lets me do a ton of damage right away without actually touching the enemy. Just not quite as good as the shield and body of Ascarium. So going over that, what do you guys think? Do you have better ideas for DPS? Because if you do, I'd love to hear them down in the comments. Maybe you'll get to affect my build. Do you want to see other content specifically? Obviously, this one was made as a request with other people, so if you request things, I just might make them. So let me know what content you also want to see. Until then, though, may RNG bless you, and may you always, always, always deal as much damage as possible.